Good afternoon, everybody. Today, Giridhar Rao is with us. So he will take us through his thoughts on voluntary free reading. And all of you know, in the language enrichment course, self-reading is very important component. And so he will be sharing some of the thoughts today on how can we promote voluntary free reading. Over to you, Giridhar. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Arun. Welcome, everybody. I'm Giridhar Rao with the School of Education in Azim Premji University. What I will be sharing is the pleasures of reading for pleasure, the advantages of reading for pleasure. And the talk is based on an article that appeared in 2018, which I will show you in a moment. And based on that article, I have a presentation, which we will watch for, I think 30-40 minutes or 45 minutes or so. And then we can open it up for discussion. So just a moment. This is the article on which the talk is based. If for some reason you're not able to see the article, please tell me. Otherwise, I will assume that you are able to see it without any problem. This article is called The Power of Reading, and it appeared in a journal called Language and Language Teaching. Language and Language Teaching in 2019. Did I say 2018? I meant 2019, right? You can find it online on the Azim Premji University website. This article is first author is Willy Renandia, and we will look at a case study of Willy in this article, in this presentation. And one of the co-authors is this man, Stephen Krashen, a linguist, US linguist, whose theories of free voluntary reading, those theories of Stephen Krashen are the basis of what I'm about to say. So the article itself is called The Power of Reading, Case Histories of Second and Foreign Language Readers, right? Now, let me stop sharing this and go back to sharing my presentation. Yeah. Once again, if there is a problem with seeing the presentation, if the slides are not moving or something, do please tell me, right? Otherwise, I'm assuming that all is well, that you are able to.
So far, it's good. It's going well.
Good. Okay. Teachers as readers. The reason I've called it this is that very often one hears this comment. I used to be an avid reader at one time. I used to read voraciously. I used to get great pleasure in reading all kinds of things. Then something happened. Usually it is, I used to be, something set in the past. And what happened? Well, normal life happened. So people are often, who used to think that they were once very good readers, lack of time, lack of access, lack of material, lack of interest, all kinds of lack of happen. Those factors are very important. But what can be done about it? What can be done for that? So some of this talk will be about the benefits of reading for pleasure. And the second part will be, so the first part is called unstructured reading, where we will look at Willy Renandia, the case study. Willy is from Indonesia. The second part is the structuring of unstructured reading. So after you've acquired the habit of unstructured reading or refound the pleasure of reading, how do you structure it? So some examples from the Children's Literature Festival that we organize at Azim Premji University. It's called Kathavana. So some example from there might be one way of thinking about how to structure this unstructured reading. Yeah. The case study is of, as I said, Willy Renandia from that article that I showed just now. He's from Indonesia and read in Indonesian language, in the language of Indonesia, Bahasa Indonesia. That's the national language, and that was one of the languages he knew. That was the language of his education, medium of instruction, and so on. And like a good, like a normal boy, his favorites were comics and series novels, novels set in the same series. A series of them. What kind of series novels? I'll tell you in a moment. But there was no serious fiction at all. He did not read any classics, Indonesian classics. He did not read any classical great literature with a capital L. He read literature with a small L. Everyday fun things that children read, young people read. No non-fiction at all. No, not even newspapers. So very limited reading from the point of view of many teachers, for example, or parents. Yeah, we only like to read these so-called kung fu novels. The last bullet point on this slide. Only kung fu novels, and these were novels about the martial art of kung fu. The novels were about fighting, love, friendship, hatred, loyalty, betrayal, all kinds of dramatic emotions. So those are the kinds of novels he liked to read, right? He also had English as one of his subjects in school, just as many of us have had. And the same result also was, the result was also similar. 6 years of high school, English in high school, and the result is an almost non-functional English. Very familiar story to us in India, right? Barely usable English, hardly could barely write a sentence or paragraph or whatever. So he never used English for meaningful communication, neither orally nor in writing. I mean, Telsina Kada, it's a familiar story to us in India, right? But again, once again, for livelihood reasons or whatever, good job prospects, he joined an English teacher training college. Chudandi asalu, what an irony of fate, kada. So he joined the English teacher training college. Now the English teacher training college recognized that students often come with poor English skills, but they want to become English teachers because there is good job prospects, etc. Again, a familiar story for us in India. So the college had a reading library which used to have David Copperfield, Moby Dick, these classics of English literature, capital L, English literature, and he had to read them and write book reports on those classics as part of his English remedial course kind of thing. Boring books, as far as he was concerned. After his diet of kung fu novels, it's not surprising that he found this very, very boring. And he found the book reports quite burdensome, having to write reports and so on. So he had more or less given up that he will ever learn English properly. Then one day in a local bookshop, Willie discovers novels, racy novels. Perry Mason is the name of the main character in those novels. These were detective novels written by Earl Stanley Gardner, who died in 1970. Right, so 20th century writer, and the detective novels starred the main character was Perry Mason. A series of 80 novels Gardner wrote, of murder trial novels. Right, these are novels set in the United States. I think Los Angeles or somewhere on the West Coast. And they're set in 20th century America, 20th century United States. And these are all murder novels where a murder happens and detective discovers the murderer and brings him to trial. So the novels end in a murder trial. Just a moment. I will just stop sharing for a moment and then come back. I want to mute a tab in my computer, which is making some noise. Just a moment, please. Yeah. Let me come back to the presentation and share the screen once more. Yeah. So he discovered these Perry Mason novels in a local bookshop in Indonesia, right? The covers of these Perry Mason novels are like these. Um, there is just a moment. There is a black box on the top, right? It's the okay. Anyway, so the covers are like this. So I put two covers on the screen. I hope you can see them. The case of the velvet claws on the left, and the lake case of the lonely heiress on the right. These book covers, as you can see, the book covers themselves are really dramatic. They are already telling you a story. And the detective on the left cover, I think that Detective Perry Mason is depicted on the cover. So you can see what an attractive novel it would have been for a young person, a college-going student, young man, right? There's a whole drama happening. So it was covers like these that attracted him. And so he read, well, as you can see, it's a great cover. The story is racy, um, fast moving, and plenty of dialogue, not long descriptions as in Moby Dick of the sea or of the whale or whatever in one of your classic novels, literature with a capital L, right? No, this is plenty of dialogue and that too in informal contemporary English, right? Plus, every novel, since it's a murder novel, there is a lot of medical forensic information, medical science information. And every novel pretty much ends in a court scene. So lots of legal information as well, lots of legal language. So lots of formal language also. So the dialogues themselves are in contemporary English, and the many of the descriptions, many of the serious parts of the novel have medical terminology and legal terminology. But our Willie finished the first novel in just hours. And just imagine what sense of satisfaction he must have got. No? Here was a novel that he pulled out by himself from the shelf in a bookshelf, in a bookshop, bought the novel, read it, and couldn't put it down. It was a great sense of achievement. There were initial issues, of course. He was, after all, an Indonesian young man reading about a novel set in Los Angeles, California, in the United States, right? So there was new vocabulary, new cultural vocabulary. For example, he may not have known what a hamburger was or whatever a soda pop was, right? Medical vocabulary, legal vocabulary. So new vocabulary, new expressions, US English, right? That was not familiar kind of English to him. So there must have been initial issues, and he reports this that there were initial issues. He didn't understand everything in the first novel, but 5 novels later, he understood pretty much everything in those novels. Eventually, he ended up reading 50 of those 80 Perry Mason novels. Imagine that. That bookshop owner must have blessed him as a good customer, right? He read 50 of those 80 Perry Mason novels. Once again, notice like the Kung Fu novels, he just read those novels, right? But then didn't stop there. He began to read other detective novels, the Sherlock Holmes novels, the Agatha Christie novels, both of which are much more complex, linguistically much more complex than the Perry Mason novels. Whereas his classmates continued to read in that reading club thing that I mentioned earlier, no? This one. Where was it? The college had a reading library, the second bullet point says, right? Where his classmates continued with the reading library. But this guy, this Willie, was not doing that anymore. He was doing this Perry Mason novels. It had a huge impact on his language proficiency. Notice not only of his understanding of California, Los Angeles of 1950s, but on his language proficiency, right? And how do we know that? Here is a student who came and had the lowest grades in the class in that batch, and he graduates 4 years, 3 years, 4 years later with the highest CGPA, highest GPA, grade point average in that batch. Enormous improvement, and in all subjects, right? I mean, this is a teacher training course. So he must have done a course in child psychology, he must have done a course in language pedagogy, he must have done a course in history of education, all the usual B.Ed subjects he must have done, right? And he graduated in those subjects with the highest GPA, right? The exams were not about Perry Mason novels. There's no other explanation. The classmates continued to be where they were. This young man did not go and spend 6 months in a English-speaking country. He did not suddenly develop pen friends all over the world. He did not have a rich uncle or aunt sending him reading material from the United States. Nothing like that. This was just this reading, and he didn't even know, because he was asked many times by his friends, "What is happening? How come you're doing so well?" He said, "I don't know." He had no idea. And it was only when he went to graduate school to do a PhD. In the US, they call PhD programs graduate school. So when he went to do to graduate school in the United States, then he discovered that he this free voluntary reading must have been responsible for his tremendous improvement, right? In fact, Willy Renandia is now a professor of education in Singapore, so very much a part of the education community. What are some of the lessons we can draw from the case study? Here are a few. The first thing to note is that Willy chose the material. It was self-selected material. Yeah, it was from a bookshop. So the bookshop had a finite variety. Correct, that's true. It did not have everything. But within that, there was enough variation. And he chose what he wanted to read, right? It was free voluntary reading, which means no book reports, nothing to write about it, no questions asked, no questions to answer, no surveys, no nothing, no some book summaries. Reading at your own pace, that was the second feature of this free voluntary reading. No deadlines. He did not need to return it to the library or have to submit an assignment or nothing like that. No pressure on him. And finally, if he didn't like the book, he could put it down. He could say, okay, I'll read, maybe I will come back to it later, maybe I won't. So it was a completely free voluntary reading. You don't finish the book if you don't like it. Yeah, that's one set of lessons from the Willy case study. A second set of lessons, that high literature is not necessary. Literature with a capital L, that's not necessary at all. That's one of the lessons here. He's reading popular detective fiction, right? Exactly the kind of fiction that my parents would have frowned on. They would have said, "What is this? You're wasting your time. You should be reading classics." No, not at all here, right? Comics, detective novels, bestsellers, all these were his diet of reading, right? The Sherlock Holmes novels were not high literature either, right? And narrow reading. So only Sherlock Holmes, that was the other kind of objection parents and teachers often had. Come on, you must read widely. Don't keep reading only one kind of thing. Here, from the lesson seems to be that it does not matter. There is a lot of benefit from narrow reading. Yeah, only Chetan Bhagat, to take an Indian example, no problem. That's one seems to be one of the lessons of from the Willy case study, Willy Renandia case study. And there's also another lesson from the case study, namely that the free voluntary reader eventually moves to other material, other kinds of reading. In his case, he read other detective fiction, Sherlock Holmes, Agatha Christie, much more like literature with a capital L, right? And yet not quite that, but there was no danger, there was no fear that he would just stop there. If the material is available, he would read other material also. So there is a lesson here. And finally, one of the most important lessons from this case study seems to be that the skills that he learned from free voluntary reading, the skills seem to be transferable skills. He was able to use those skills for academic purposes. So those academic skills came as a result of the skills acquired in free voluntary reading. This is really important and a source of great optimism for us, no? As teachers, as readers ourselves, right? And of course, as parents and caregivers, this is something we should keep in mind, that adolescents who read for pleasure and are reading very narrowly as far as you can tell, as you, from your point of view, you should not worry too much about it. If you make material available, looks like they will move to other material. And not only that, the skills seem to be transferable. But there are some essential conditions for this to happen, for these advantages to happen. The first is that the initial experience should be a pleasant one. Should be able to read something for pleasure and get pleasure out of that. You cannot expect this initial reader who is struggling with English to read even simplified version of Moby Dick and expect them to like it, right? So an initial pleasant reading experience seems to be an essential condition. A second essential condition is access to interesting reading material, right? And in today's world, that should not be a problem at all. We have the internet. Just imagine. He was lucky that the bookshop contained all kinds of reading material. The Perry Mason novels, first of all, but also the Sherlock Holmes and Agatha Christie novels. No? Agatha Christie is a British writer. Sherlock Holmes, as you know, is the detective character created by Arthur Conan Doyle, right? So access to reading interesting material seems to be one of the essential conditions of this exercise, of this free voluntary reading. A time and place to read regularly. This is something that you have to make. You have to make time and place available, right? Perhaps a regular reading for half an hour before falling asleep, or reading for half an hour after lunch, before you get back to work, and maybe nothing more than that is needed, right? The only danger is that if the book is really interesting, half an hour may not be enough. You may end up spending much more time than you should be. But that danger apart, making the time and place available for yourself to read for pleasure seems to be necessary, right? The freedom to select own reading, right? So the universe of books, the range of books or reading material, that may be limited. The library will have only a few thousand books, perhaps, right? But within that, there should be freedom to select what you want to read. It needn't be fiction. It could be non-fiction. It could be travel writing. And a final condition seems to be that there are no tests, no workbook, no exercises, no rewards for reading, right? In school systems in the West, especially, students get a golden star or something if they've read 4 pages or 10 pages or something. No reward seems to be necessary here. In fact, there are in the study and in other studies that Krashen has authored also, there are in fact there is research showing that a reward system doesn't seem to make any difference. If the material is interesting and self-selected, that's more than enough. An extra reward doesn't make any difference to the competence of the reader, right? There's other research to support this. There is plenty of other research to support these findings, right? I've taken this bullet points from a 2020 article by Krashen. The articles are given at the end in the references in my presentation. Yeah, the vocabulary size, other research indicates that the vocabulary size is biggest among fiction readers. It is a little less in non-fiction readers and the least in non-readers. Yeah. So there seems to be a significant benefit in vocabulary. And in the case of Perry Mason novels, as I was saying, as the case study showed, obviously, right? I mean, medical and legal terminology that he would not otherwise have used to come across is there in the novel. And if you've read 50 of those novels with the same terminology being used, they become part of your vocabulary, right? A second bit of research, finding from the research, this is the pedagogy reading research, is that self-selected reading is better than assigned reading for vocabulary gain. So if you're measuring vocabulary gain in 2 groups and one group has been assigned a reading, given a reading that, yes, this is your reading to gain your vocabulary, and the other group is allowed to choose their own reading. It looks like the research indicates that the vocabulary gain for the self-selected reading group is greater. Yeah. A third piece of research, again, highly optimistic for the argument I'm making, that 85% on academic vocabulary list, the United States education system designs academic vocabulary list for each grade. That is a grade appropriate academic vocabulary. में क्या क्या होना चाहिए ये में मुद्दा ले दांटलो, right? And 85% of that vocabulary list was found in young adult fiction, right? The kind of novels that teenagers read, the Harry Potter novels, for example, right? Which again, teachers and other people may be frowning on, parents may be frowning on as a distraction from academic reading. And yet it turns out that 85% of that vocabulary is found in this in these novels, in these 22 young reader novels. So, I mean, obviously there is a clear positive gain in such an enterprise, right? A fourth finding from reading research is that academic knowledge is greater in readers. And academic knowledge to do with history, with literature, with science is greater in people who read. And if you connect it to all the other points being made about self-selected reading, you can see why self-selected reading, free voluntary reading is to be strongly recommended. Yeah. Now, the second part of what I was planning to say, which is that, okay, that is all unstructured reading. Can we structure it somehow? Can we structure the unstructured? Well, here are some ideas on structuring the unstructured, right? Free voluntary reading, individuals do it at their own pace, for their own pleasure, right? But these readers can then be formed into reading circles, into groups, right? And with today's technology of WhatsApp and so on, the groups need not be physical, in person. They could be a virtual group, a Zoom session like this, but small groups of 10, 15 people who say, okay, we will all read something or the other that we like, right? In any of these. So one method of structuring I'm suggesting here, but I'm sure other groups will find their own way of structuring it. But one way is to maybe shortlist 5 genres. Genre is the type of reading, right? So fiction might be a genre, poetry may be another genre, travel writing may be a genre, detective fiction, science fiction, fantasy, historical fiction, all these are also can be called genres or subgenres. Shortlist a list of five such genres, right? For each genre, collect some material, some reading material suggested by the members. Yeah, if you're interested in historical fiction, okay, list 4 or 5 novels which you've liked, which are historical in nature. That can be the part of the list. Similarly, do it for science fiction or fantasy fiction. So for each genre, list some interesting reading material and share that. Share the material among the group and give time to people to choose their material, right? They may not, they may try something and say, no, it's interesting, but it's not really very interesting to me. That's okay, right? They can take some more time to choose their material, right? And the group meets maybe online once a week, yeah, to keep the momentum going. This is one model of structuring that we have used, and it seems to work quite well. Group meets once a week, an hour every Friday evening, Saturday morning or something, whatever is convenient to the group, right? Everybody attends, but only a few members in each session share their reading, right? There won't be time for 10, 15 people to share what they like, but the people talk about how they are enjoying what they're reading, right? It's a moderated discussion so that it doesn't go all over the place. There is some way of structuring this conversation that the reading circle has. Yeah, this is the reading circle that I'm talking about. It's the second slide here, second bullet point here, right? Moderated discussion. What kinds of questions would the reading circle address? It could do with the themes of the story, right? An obvious thing. What is the story about? What else is the story about? A good story may not be about one thing alone. It may have multiple themes, right? It may have a prominent theme and a metaphorical theme, that it's not about detective fiction at all. It's a fight between good and evil, for example, might be one way of structuring it. That there is a surface theme which seems to be about a murder story, but the underlying theme is maybe a religious one, maybe a ethical one, a moral one, right? So discussing the theme of the story may be very interesting, especially if two members have read the same story. They may in fact come up with different readings of the novel, and that itself is interesting to notice that. Yes, oh, you noticed this, huh? I didn't notice that. Can you, that's fine, Kada. The kind of approach that different people may have adds to the richness of the discussion. The story setting might be a second thing to share, right? How do you know where it is set? What is it that tells you it is set? It is set on another planet, for example, in a science fiction story or a science fiction novel, right? What is it that tells you that it is set in the 1950s, right? How do you know that it's the 1950s? Maybe the movie that one of the characters saw has just been released. He mentions it. Piazza, for example, right? You would know that that movie is a 1950s movie, and if the story is saying he went to see the first day, first show, you know that, okay, this must be a 1950s novel or story, right? How is the story? What is the evidence in the text for the setting of the story, right? That's a very interesting way of giving arguments from within the text for your reading, right? The use of language. Oh yeah, sorry. Third is characters worth discussing, right? Which are the characters who are really important in this? Yes, obviously there will be a hero, what's called a protagonist, a chief actor, usually a positive actor, and then there be an antagonist whom he is struggling against, right? I'm saying he, but it could be anyone, right? Um, so, but there might be other characters who are less important for the plot, right? And yet play an important role, as an essential role, in fact. So, who are the characters worth discussing? And surprising answers will emerge of somebody who doesn't seem to be the main character, and yet is essential for some action, some part of the plot to happen. And so that character is not a side character anymore, not a discardable character worth mentioning, right? Where often literary critics point to that kind of character and say the lesser known characters in this novel or this novelist, this author's work, they are important, right? It may be a character who's dead, who's not a character at all in the novel, whose presence is making the plot move. All the actions, all the motivation for the action is coming from the dead character. So that may be a very interesting way of thinking about it. It may not even be a person, right? I don't know if you've seen the movie Dune, a recent science fiction movie, right? Where the one of the characters seems to be the planet itself. You can describe the desert planet Dune, which is where the action is set, as a character in itself, at least in the novel. It's based on a 1965 novel called Dune by Frank Herbert, Herbert, an American writer, right? It's based on that, and if you read that novel, Dune, you realize that, oh, one of the characters is the planet itself. The planet called Arrakis or Dune is itself seems to function like a character, right? Use of language, and the fourth bullet point in this reading circle questions, right? What kind of language has been used? If it's historical fiction, very often the language will not be contemporary English, right? The characters will talk in a way that is set in that period. I don't know if you remember this um, classic Telugu movies, Maya Bazar, or the Ramayana serial that appeared, Ramanand Sagar's Ramayana serial, which came on television many years ago. Right, but it was characteristic. The characteristic use of language in that was of a certain epic style. That's what they were trying to do, right? The old NTR movies have a similar use of Telugu, right? After the Ramayana, for many months, young people, I was younger then, like me, would jokingly say, instead of saying "Baithiye," please sit, we'd say "Asan Grahan Kare." Yeah, a very formal way of, flowery way of saying that. So, use of language is a very interesting topic of discussion in the reading circle, right? What kind of language is being used, right? And who's using which kind of language. So the king might be using a kingly sort of language and so on, right? The narrator, who's telling the story, right? The point, from whose point of view is the story being told? As you know, Volga, the Telugu writer, has written the story of the Ramayana told from Sita's point of view, right? Likewise, there are many texts that have been rewritten from other points of view. Sometimes the narrator is a child in several stories. So then you see the entire plot through the limited cognition, limited view of the child, right? The famous English novel To Kill a Mockingbird, for example, is told from the point of view of a child, right? So we as readers know much more, as adult readers, know much more about what's happening than what is being told to us from the point of view of a 8-year-old, 10-year-old child, right? And so the novel becomes very interesting because as readers, we know that there is more to the story than the way the story is being told. A great point of discussion in a reading circle exercise. A further refinement could be to say, suppose the story was told by the woman in the story who does not have a voice at all. How would the story be told, right? So it's a what may be called a counterfactual, hypothetical. Suppose it were to happen like this, right? So you could change the point of view of the story in your reading circle discussion. How else could the story have been told? I've covered that more or less here, right? Could the story have been written as a newspaper report, for example? How would a journalist have told this story, the murder story, right? How would the parents of the victim speak about the whole episode? We often get this in television coverage, right? If it's a week-long coverage of a event, we often get multiple points of view. So these are live reading circle questions that can easily come up in your discussions. And then beyond the text, right? After all, so many novels, so many stories become the basis of films. I just mentioned Dune, for example, right? Or the Ramayana, hundreds of adaptations, thousands of adaptations, right? And it's an enormously rich source. The Mahabharata, even more so, right? Epics are a great source. So, how are these adaptations done, right? A great source of comparison between two different adaptations of the same story. So there is a variety of reading circle activities that are rich and rewarding that can structure this unstructured reading. So I think that is more or less the kind of structuring I had in mind for this unstructured reading based on free voluntary reading. FVR is what I have called it in a 2019 article I wrote. So you can see how many benefits there are. It's a nice graphic, so I thought I could use it. The editors made this graphic of the benefits of free voluntary reading, right? Love for reading, to start at the leftmost, bottom left. It cultivates a love for reading because it is voluntary, because it is self-selected. You get world knowledge. Willy Renandia discovered what life in California and Los Angeles was from these novels. The vocabulary, as I said, medical, legal vocabulary. Spelling, often considered an indicator of how capable a language user you are. You see the same spelling of a word like a medical term like cardiology, and you will get it if it appears in 20 different novels. The cardiology department that the main character uh, uh, visits, you will spelling will remain in the head, right? Grammar too, similarly, same kinds of questions are asked. So question or negation sentences often are a fairly late acquisition in language learning. In all language, second language learning, negation is acquired later. How to make negative sentences, right? uh, he ate the food, he didn't eat the food, right? Didn't comes after he in English, right? उसने खाना नहीं खाया, उसने खाना खाया, नहीं comes in the third, uh, after the third word, उसने खाना नहीं खाया. So negation is acquired late, but if you come across this again and again examples of it, the grammar also falls in place. A writing style, really important part of how well you can control a language, right? Can you write it in the style of a journalist? Can you write it in the style of a teacher? Can you write it in the style of a judge, right? The writing style, understanding writing style, right? Reading comprehension, guessing the motivation of a character, understanding that what is being told is only a part of the story. Understanding how do you know that this character is lying from the reading the story? There is something there. So advanced reading comprehension strategies. These are all benefits of free voluntary reading, because you're constantly interacting with the text. No? It's not a passive reading. You're constantly stopping wherever you can, wherever you want to, because there is no pressure on you. You stop and wonder, why is he said that? Yeah, these are questions that anybody who reads for pleasure does. They interact with the text. So reading comprehension enormously improves, right? And that is a transferable comprehension. Huh? The same questions he will ask, the student will ask, Willie must have asked while reading an academic text. Why is he making this argument? What is this argument? How is it fit in the context of the bigger argument? How does it connect to the other theories? So these are all reading comprehension, advanced reading comprehension strategies that have first been cultivated and developed in pleasure reading, reading for pleasure, in free voluntary reading of those Perry Mason detective novels. And finally, a really advanced aspect of free voluntary reading, a knowledge of literary genres and elements, right? Elements like plot, character, setting. These are all elements of fiction, right? These are the building blocks. If I was thinking of a Lego set that children play with, right? Building blocks of fiction. They interact together to form the complete work of art, right? These are things that are very difficult to teach. They are acquired, however, unconsciously almost in the process of reading for pleasure, right? A knowledge of literary genres. How do you know that this is a science fiction novel? How do you know that this is historical fiction, right? Of course, it may be in the science fiction shelf in the bookshop. That itself is literary understanding. That itself is understanding of a literary genre. But from the first page itself, how do you know that there is which genre this belongs to, right? These are the kinds of things that eventually we are formally taught at the MA level, MA English level, MA literature classes, right, in whatever language. But all these are acquired much earlier, entirely from reading for pleasure. So I thought I would share this this big list of benefits. Reminds me that it looks like a bit like Chyawanprash, no? Meant for all kinds of uses. So this is free voluntary reading is the Chyawanprash of reading, I suppose. Yeah, you get to many benefits. And I wanted to share this as a personal enrichment process of becoming becoming once again the reader that you once were, that many people remember fondly, right? How to acquire that and why you should actually set aside the time and space for it. and I thought I wanted to share this argument with all of you. So now I'll just look at the references here, which will be in the recording, I suppose, right? A couple of references from Krashen, and one from my 2019 brief article on comprehension in the English classroom in India. Right, this was part of a early literacy initiative of the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. One of my colleagues, Shailaja Menon, and some other younger colleagues put together this series. Right, so I have an article there where I give this argument about how to improve in comprehension. Right, ran the Willy case study, that itself, right, the language and language teaching 2019 issue by Renandia et al. And others, right? So thank you very much. This was my argument for the pleasure of becoming a reader once again. Questions, comments, queries, your own thoughts, your own experiences, most welcome. I will stop sharing now so that we can have an interaction. Thank you. So 45 minutes is what I have taken as planned. I will open the chat box also, just in case there are questions in chat. But otherwise, people are welcome to ask their questions. And if the organizer can take the questions from the live stream and put them here, I'll be happy to see if I can address them. That experience must be familiar to you, of being a avid reader once, someone who read voraciously, but somehow, somehow you're no longer that kind of that enthusiastic a reader.
Looks like there are no questions, Giri.
Fine, that's also fine.
We can conclude.
We can conclude. That's fine. That's fine. So my address is on that shared document. Just a moment. Yeah, rao.giridhar@apu.edu.in. This is my email address. Yeah. So feel free to contact me, write to me about your experiences. Maybe I can, if I present this again, I can use some of your experiences as material in the presentation, right? And if you have other experiences or other thoughts about this pleasure of becoming a reader once again, do share, right? Okay, in that case, thank you very much for your attention. Yeah, Arun, should I log out then?
Yes, Giri. Thanks, everybody. We will see you in another call very soon.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Thanks, Giri.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.